Hi, this is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. The title of this podcast is Demonic Possession and Astral Projection. This is your trigger warning. If demonic possession is a trigger for you, you should skip this podcast. Of course, you clicked on the title, so don't blame me if you can't sleep without the light on. I get a lot of, well, not a lot, but I get a regular supply of questions asking about will I get demonically possessed if I astral project? I have touched upon this subject briefly in one of my videos, but I think it's important to devote a whole podcast to this particular subject because there's just such a widespread linkage between the two, and we need to discuss whether that linkage is genuine or whether it's the equivalent of an old wives' tale about keeping the window open at night and you'll get cold or the flu. So let's get started. Um, for the purpose of this podcast, I'm going to discuss demonic possession as a genuine occurrence. Keep in mind that mainstream science discounts possession as a real condition, attributing the symptoms to brain tumors and or undiagnosed psychiatric disorders. I must discuss demonic possession first before discussing any relation to astral projection, so please be patient. Now, as you know, I have been astral projecting for over 57 years. However, my interest in demonic possession started quite apart from my astral projection when my religious teacher in high school asked me if I would volunteer to be one of four assistants in an exorcism in Philadelphia in 1979. To say the least, I was intrigued. I also appreciated the trust that he was placing in me with such an unusual request. However, we had a fairly close relationship, so I believe he felt he could trust me to keep this particular request confidential. Now, the afflicted was a 12-year-old boy who had just emigrated with his family from Puerto Rico. Normally, the exorcist priest would call on close friends and family members to assist in the Roman Catholic rite of exorcism. But the family had few friends or relatives, and those they did have in the area were terrified to come within a country mile of this tortured boy's home. I told my parents that night that I was going to see the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which was a very popular movie at that time, and that I was going to be sleeping over at a friend's house because I was told that this might take all night. When I arrived outside the tenement in West Philadelphia, I waited outside until the priest and the junior priest, along with the other three assistants, arrived for the ritual. As one, we all went inside. Now, the interior of this poor home had some scattered, mismatched, hand-me-down type furniture. The atmosphere was oppressive and lit only by a single barren lamp with a dim 40-watt bulb. Fear and human sweat filled the air, tinged with fear and resignation. The exorcist was a small man in his 70s, but he had a firm, gently commanding presence. He asked the woman, with a few words of Spanish, to take us to the young man. We all climbed the narrow, creaky wooden stairs, the two priests leading the way. The exorcist opened the door and he went inside. The assistant priest stayed behind to instruct we four on the rules of the road for assistance. We each were assigned a limb. I got the left leg. It was my responsibility to hold down this leg if called upon to do so by the exorcist. Additional instructions were as follows. Number 1, the exorcist's commands were to be instantly obeyed without question. Anyone who felt they couldn't comply with this command was to leave before the ritual started. Once begun, none could leave without the exorcist calling for a break. Number 2, we were not to look the possessed child in the eyes, nor interact with him in any way. We were not to smile, laugh, cry, or show any emotion in any way in response to what we might see, hear, smell, taste, feel, etc. We were not to speak to the boy, nor ask or respond to any questions that might be posed to us by him. All of these warnings impressed upon me that this would not be a joking matter. When the exorcist was ready for us, he called us into the room. Inside was a cramped and dark bedroom, not much bigger really than a good walk-in closet. A single ceiling-mounted light fixture hung above. It contained 3 burnt bulbs and one barely burning in between occasional flickering. All furnishings had been removed from the room, save a mattress and a box spring covered with a tarp rather than bed sheets. A lone family picture hung just above a wooden cross on the wall facing the barren bed. I could only speculate what must have happened to prompt the placement of the tarp in place of bed sheets. The priest began to read the rite of exorcism. He did so for several hours before calling the first break. The boy seemed to be asleep most of the time, although he opened his eyes in a vacant stare periodically. I almost wish I could tell you lots of wacky stuff happened during the all-night exorcism. But other than the oppressive air, only one thing of note happened during the night. After the first break, the picture fell, knocking the cross to the floor with a crash. I reacted involuntarily with a start, earning me a quick glance of warning from the exorcist himself. Let's just say I was happy I'd urinated before returning for round 2. I was not called upon to restrain the boy's left leg at all during the rite, for which I gave a silent thanks. In the morning, after a very long night, the bedroom atmosphere felt lighter. The exorcist, through his assistant priest, thanked us and sent us home. Before leaving, I asked a question of the boy's mother that had been long on my mind during that night. In my best high school Spanish, I asked her whether the boy had ever had any strange dreams about flying prior to falling ill. She denied that he'd had any unusual dreams, and I believed her. Thus began my investigation into whether astral projection was involved in any way with demonic possession, as I had read occasionally in the past. Now, I call this the hermit crab theory of astral projection / demonic possession. A few years back, I saw a nature program on hermit crabs. In that special, I saw a medium-sized hermit crab abandon his shell to crawl into a vacant larger shell. An instant later, I witnessed a small crab take over the now vacated medium-sized shell. I imagined some tiny crab would eventually claim the now empty shell that was just vacated during this odd game of musical chairs. This special seemed to me to be a perfect metaphor for the fears surrounding possession and astral projection. If the astral traveler dared leave his body shell for a minute, surely some other creature would slide into this now empty vessel. However, my research does not confirm this hypothesis. Now, when researching cases of demonic possession, there are very few that are publicly made available because the Catholic Church is extraordinarily secretive when it comes to the Roman rite of exorcism. So really, only a few cases have made it into the public sphere that I could actually study and try to find out whether there was any connection at all between astral projection and possession. The first is the case of the possession of Roland Doe, which was not his real name. In the 1940s, the boy involved had had some experience using a Ouija board with his aunt prior to his demonic possession. However, despite a rigorous psychological examination and a detailed report by the exorcist in this case, no mention of astral projection was made. You might be familiar with this case because it became the seed material for the famous book and movie The Exorcist that starred Linda Blair. The second case is equally famous, I would say, and this was the possession of, quote, Emily Rose, whose real name was Anneliese Michel. Anneliese was a very religious German Roman Catholic girl. She was so religious that she actually went to Mass twice per week. She was originally diagnosed with temporal lobe epilepsy and depression, and treated for these conditions unsuccessfully. Eventually, she underwent 67 exorcisms that eventually resulted in her death, at which point she weighed 68 pounds or about 30 kilos. There was no evidence uncovered that she had ever had any experience with the occult, nor experienced any astral projections prior to demonic infestation. The next thing I want to talk about is a book by Father Malachi Martin, and it's quite an interesting, if seminal, book on possession. It's called Hostage to the Devil. Now, Father Martin thoroughly reviews 5 cases of demonic possession in the United States. Of these 5 cases, only one specifically mentions a psychic phenomena that might best be described as remote viewing. Once the possessed man had this demonic spirit inside him, he reported that he was able to project portions of his consciousness to faraway places where he'd be able to view what was going on and then return with that information. However, he reported that no remote viewing had occurred or any astral projection had occurred prior to his possession by the demonic. So he may have gained spiritual talents as a result of the demonic possession, but astral projection had played no part in the actual cause of the possession. My own case, I have had many thousands of astral projections to date. I remain unpossessed, happy, with a loving family, and comfortable surroundings. My conclusion, based on all of my investigations since 1979, and by the way, the reason I'm talking about it now is I just found out that the second priest that had taken part in this particular rite had passed away, and that the oath that I had sworn to both priests to keep this absolutely confidential expired as the last priest passed on, which is why I'm sharing it with you now, and I have never talked about this prior to this particular podcast. But I have found no causal relationship between astral projection and demonic possession. The Roman Church has carefully documented cases of possession for many centuries, and they can't explain definitively why some people are attacked while the mass of humanity is spared. If an unusual ability like astral projection popped up in case after case after case prior to demonic possession, it would have been most definitely noted by these very detail-oriented priests. I think the whole idea of astral projection opening up some sort of window for possession is basically the occult version of an old wives' tale. No one seems to have any proof of this other than stories or perhaps their own, quote, common sense that if you vacate your body for some period of time, that suddenly it is wide open to infestation by something else. But this old wives' tale has no basis in fact that I have been able to find. One of the things that I have been questioned about in relation to my experiences with astral projection is, have I ever used drugs like LSD, mescaline, magic mushrooms, for instance? And I never have, because I didn't want to open myself to any theories or perhaps any ideas that what I was experiencing with astral projection was artificially created in any way. Now, these substances have been used by many populations over time, especially things like mescaline and magic mushrooms have been used by native populations to induce what they would consider dream walking. So I believe that these substances might assist astral projection, but I have never used them, and I do not believe that they're necessary. But as I'm talking about this and native cultures, we have to understand that astral projection is not some weird ability. It is not some alien ability. We are not violating some sort of cosmic laws by doing it. Native Americans, as well as Native Australians, Native populations really all over the world have their own words for dream walking, leaving the body and walking about. It is something that is ingrained in their culture and considered very natural in these native populations. Going back to ancient Egypt, the priests of Osiris, in order to become promoted to a full priest from an acolyte, had to be placed into a sarcophagus where they had to slow down their heart rate to just a few beats a minute, slow down their breathing rate, and then project their ka, or their astral body, out into the cosmos. When the ritual was over and the sarcophagus opened, if the acolyte was still alive, and if they could talk about their astral experience, their astral projection, they would then become a full priest of Osiris. So even going back in time, thousands of years, we see astral projection again is a very natural phenomenon. It is not a violation of any sort of cosmic laws. It really is every bit as natural as learning how to walk, learning how to run, learning how to speak. I think what has happened is that the Western world has discarded anything that does not bestow obvious riches or other types of gifts in the physical world. So we've forgotten this natural ability. We've made it into something alien, something that is in fact so alien that you'll be punished by being thrown out of your own body and allowing some evil force to occupy it. Lastly, I'd like to mention that all of us astral project, just not consciously. There is something called sleepwalker school, and I have been a part of said school. I have also seen the school being taught. People are taken out of their bodies and taken to astral classrooms where knowledge is taught to them so that they can bring some of it back to the physical and use it as a benefit for the human race. 20 years ago or so, I woke up in one of these astral classes where the subject was the holographic universe. Now, I had no idea what that meant, and I don't think anybody knew exactly what that meant 20 or so years ago, because the theory has been progressed now only fairly recently. Now, I wish I'd stayed for the lecture, but I just decided to leave and go astral projecting consciously at that point. So I left the classroom, and the teacher just kind of smiled and waved at me as I left. But what I'm saying here is that many of us are being taken out of our bodies anyway for these classrooms. So if astral projection was really all that was required for demonic possession, we would have millions and millions and millions of cases of this constantly. And yet we don't. Now, do I know what causes demonic possession? Assuming, of course, that it is a real condition and not something that only the superstitious believe and that science has discounted. I don't. I do not know. The Roman Catholic Church does not know and cannot explain why some are afflicted and some are not. I'm not an expert in demonic possession. It was just an interest that I picked up. However, I do know a lot about astral projection. And I would not have this channel. I would not have Astral Club if I felt that there was any danger to you. So, I hope this becomes the definitive podcast, dispelling any remaining fears that astral projection is some sort of a foreign or alien concept, or that it violates some cosmic laws allowing for demonic infestation. It does not. And there is no proof that I've ever seen or encountered to the contrary. So, thank you for sitting through this longish podcast. If you liked this, please hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and hit that bell so that you'll always get notification when I have a new podcast. And as always, I will see you on the astral plane. Bye-bye now.